I will rapidly change my background so you can think of me as a speaker rather than a host for a few moments. And I'll share my screen. So here we go. Right. So yeah, hopefully that's shared and displayed. Let me just change. Cool. Okay, so yeah, so I'm, as you can tell, Oscar from Fundamentally Games. We are a group of people who've been around the industry for a long time. Myself, I've been around for 22 years. I've been running LiveOps-based games for about most of that time. In fact, my career started in games when I worked with British Telecom on an online gaming platform called Wireplay with dial-up modems. Yes, dial-up modems. I'm that old. So we had games like Quake, Unreal Tournament, Counter-Strike. I get to claim I saved Counter-Strike. It's a bit of a lie, but we did actually buy them some new computers, and the fifth, I think it was the fifth beta for Counter-Strike had our logo everywhere. But enough of that. And I've worked in our mobile with running as an operator platform, and I've also worked as home architect on PlayStation Home, so a virtual world, which I so wish still exist in this era, but sadly was long departed. And I've been a consultant for a long time. So earlier this year, in end of March, early April, we closed a seed round for a new company, which is Fundamentally Games, and we focus on live operations. So what I want to try and talk about basically is what on earth is LiveOps. To me, LiveOps is actually pretty straightforward. It's about getting more people, doing more things, more often, for longer. That's a fairly simple mentality, but if you think about it, you know, the idea of acquiring and understanding users and understanding what they do and how to get them to do that more often and more regularly and to keep doing it, to me, that's the magic of scale. You know, we can just buy users, we can go and do the marketing, we can do the influencer generation. If we don't focus on the players and the value they get, we are wasting our time. Doesn't matter how much audience we get coming in if we don't look after them. Now, don't get me wrong, I think there are amazing people out there who do amazing things with user acquisition, with publishing, even self-publishing. But what we want to focus on is how do you get more players doing more things more often for longer. So why do I think this? Well, obviously, I've been around a long time. I've looked at a lot of data. And what I try to do is to think about the user experience. And I use a model based on a book called book called Crossing the Chasm by a guy called Geoffrey Moore. Geoffrey Moore, it's an old book. I'm a trained marketing guy. Most of you will never read this book, but it was quite influential to me. And it looked at the adoption of goods, particularly technology goods, and used a thing called the Gartner hype curve. If you've heard of the term crossing the chasm or bridging the gap, these terms come from that book. To put it into game terms, essentially, I saw this pattern emerging when I looked at the data for players in different platforms, and it was almost always the same data. So you look at the frequency of engagement over time, and what you start with is the discovery. Get players, find the game, and you've got to get them excited enough to get them over whatever the barrier is for them to acquire it. So this is the job that publishers and self-publishing and all the marketing side is about, which is getting people excited, anticipating your game, sufficiently to get over the paywall if there's a pay up front, or the frustration wall if there is a, you know, you can always have some level of frustration, even if it's just, have I got space on my phone right now? So there's always going to be a level of frustration. So we've got to get enough anticipation that people can be bothered to click on the link and install that game, whatever platform it is. But it doesn't end there. We actually also need to think about the learning stage. So what does learning mean? Well, it's not just learning the controls, but if you think about it, the experience of a player, the first time they play will be their worst because they don't know the controls, they don't have any real emotional engagement with the game yet, and they don't know yet where the game fits into their daily routine. So if we don't look after that, if we don't have a great first-time user experience, if we don't manage that expectation of future delight, we will find that they churn. You know, people leave. That's going to be life. But what we want to do is avoid that. This stage in the Gartner hype curve, if you ever want to look at that, it's often called the pit of disillusionment. Yes, that's how we feel. In fact, it's something that happens to us. It's like buyer's remorse when we buy the wrong pair of jeans and it's like, or we order something and it turns up damaged. There's this buyer remorse. Why did I do that? And that's what's happening in this stage. We have it in every walk of life. Now, if you've got a product, what happens then is that you try to manage that product and you try to manage effectively the long tail. You may have heard that phrase. Now, so basically, to my mind, what you're doing is you're just trying to manage to make sure you get new users, but that's it. You're just trying to manage getting new users. And yes, we'll do things like sales promotions. Yes, we'll do, you know, Steam sale or whatever. But it's not really managing the experience in live of the current players. And to me, that's what LiveOps is. LiveOps is about getting the current players that you've already acquired and building up their engagement. It's sustaining their interest, helping them find the patterns of play which delight them, that fit to their daily routine, so they find the go-to experience that they choose is your game. Whether that's on the loo, whether that's when they come home after a long day at work, or more nowadays, more when they get off their screen from doing video calls and now want to play something on a screen, maybe. Anyway, that's the kind of idea. So we want to engage people, but it's not just leaving it there. We also want to see if those people want to super engage. Now, super engage is kind of what some people used to call whales. I don't like that term anymore. I've gone off it completely because I think it's the wrong psychology. It's a great word for gamblers. There is a definitive group of people who have a behavior in gambling that is called whales by the gambling industry. That isn't the same mindset in games, in my opinion. Instead, people look at games as part of their hobby, and some people will super engage, but to them, super engage is, I'll spend £5 a week. That's great. If somebody is going to spend £5 a week in my game, I'm very happy. But other people have a larger disposable income, and they want to find ways that they can invest in the game. If you've got a hobby like sailing or golf, even football, it's amazing how much you will spend for something you're truly passionate about. And I don't mean tricking people into spending here. You know, if you're an Arsenal fan, and heaven forbid if you are, but anyway, I don't speak sports, so I don't really know what I'm talking about. But if you are a fan of a particular team, don't you want that T-shirt? Don't you want that, football top? Don't you want those items? And actually, that's the point, is understanding that people want certain things as an expression of their social identity as somebody who belongs to people who like doing these things, as much as it is about the genuine passion for playing the game. But whatever we do in super engaging, we can't make that something which makes people feel excluded. It makes people feel like the game is biased. Because if we create pay to win, what we do is we break the game. But we get very sensitive about what pay to win means. And actually, different cultures have different views on what's acceptable or not. If you're in the Asian market, spending a lot of money up front is actually quite a normal thing to do, because you want to get ahead, you want to get involved, you want to see how the game plays. And that's a valuable thing for some players. In the West, that doesn't tend to be the case. In the West, we're more likely to be waiting for, a few days, maybe a week, maybe 8 days. 8 to 12 days seems to be a common range for a lot of games, because if you haven't started spending within 2 weeks, you're probably not going to be a spender. But if you have started spending earlier, you will often be a one-time spender. Our interest is finding people who love the game and find value in ongoing engagement with the game. And we want to provide things that they love. Well, what better way to find things they love than to provide an ongoing series of activities with new and exciting and valuable content that's focused and reached into why we love the game. And again, the realization that keeping people playing matters. Retention is disproportionately valuable to the revenue of your game. And so if people love the game, give them a reason to keep playing. If you abandon them, if you don't give them the support, guess what? they stop playing. So re-engaging people, again, is a massively important thing. Your game will not last forever unless you're very, very, very lucky. It's not every game is chess. But there are some amazing games in the top 10 who've been in the top 10 for years with good reason. You know, why does League of Legends last forever? Because it's got an amazing community that's managed and Riot do an amazing job. Why does Candy Crush or something like Clash of Clans still survive? Because it has an amazing experience that's continuously evolving. And if you want your game, what you find the right scale of activity, which means that you satisfy your audience's needs. When I try and think of it like a funnel sometimes, if you have lots of inputs coming in, you're going to see that funnel decline. But you don't want to just have people drop out of discovery. You want to keep activating them so they become engaged. And if they are engaged, we want to convert them so they can spend some money in the game and feel good about it. And at the end of the day, we need to understand that those people who do super engage at whatever level, they become aspirational figures for people who are engaging with the game. Look what they've done. Look what they've got. And that can feed into the community and the values of the game. And also, if the engaged audiences are telling their friends, they can feed into virality. Word of mouth still is a massively important factor in terms of engagement. So it's a funnel. Thinking about the life cycle of the game is a funnel, but have I really answered what LiveOps is? What is LiveOps really? Well, for me, LiveOps is about focusing on what happens for the point of view of the player. And I use events as a starting point for that. And events can be any number of sizes. It can be a daily challenge. It could be a theme that you have for a month. It might be a target for the whole community to achieve a value by a certain point in a week. It's a series of modifications to the game. It's a series of activities, all focused on retention. And moving on from that, we've got promotions. Well, what promotions? Well, we're going to talk a bit more about that, but it's essentially activity that's focusing on the revenue for the game. Because we are a business, as much as we are focused on, first and foremost, the player experience, and absolutely that's first and foremost, we also are putting a lot of effort and we are building a business, and we need to focus on how do we encourage people to want to spend money, to want to watch ads, to want to engage in the game in a commercial way, and doing that in a sensitive way to that audience. We also have to think about content, i.e. new elements, new items. We've got to think about features. How do we keep a momentum of that? And we'll talk a bit more about that in a second. And it all comes down to how do we maximize our engagement with our community? Giving them something to look forward to, foreshadowing what's coming, giving a sense of expectation, and also a sense of unfinished business. If we get that right, we drive growth. If we drive growth, we drive revenue. And growth doesn't have to be just in terms of numbers of new players. It's the amount of engagement, the longevity of that engagement, the momentum of retention. That drives revenue. And then we can drive that onto events as an ongoing, positive, continuous cycle. So with that in mind, what are events? Well, we kind of know what they are. They're normally spectacular, but they don't have to be. There are just a range of items here, you know, a daily challenge, even up to the marshmallow. In fact, I forget the name of the last artist of Fortnite that smashed all records. A non-gaming thing happening in a game, bringing huge communities together, is amazing. And every game can do something, maybe not attract the biggest stars in the world, but thinking about your game as a social experience, it can be a really powerful thing. And it doesn't have to be directly visible. I remember a game called Tribal Wars, which is a web-based game, and the amount of community activity that went on offline, we ended up having to use Line as a chat mechanism because people were spying. Seriously, the way the game worked, you were inevitably doomed, but you used to get together and you could be attacked any time in the morning, any time in the day, and so you had to make sure you had team members who were awake at all hours just to sustain your group and be able to react appropriately. Anyway, the point being is that what is sociable for a game is a massive driver, and whether it's just shared values, shared experience, even if it's just a space to communicate on Discord, I'm saying how you build activity that stimulates that, that's seasonal, that's actually something we can look forward to. And it doesn't have to be new content, although often it is. It doesn't have to be new features, although often it is. It can simply be configurations. And I think that's really the power. If you design your game well, you empower your community team to be able to add little twists each day that give people a compelling reason to come back. What are promotions? Well, they're anything that can be about driving retail, about driving value. And if you do that hand in hand with the events, if you know what's coming, you can be smart about it. You can create reasons, discounts, value propositions that people care about and they get excited about. You know, people get excited about waiting for the Steam sale. And I'd actually argue that Steam sale is not necessarily a good model. But if I have an event that's going to use lots of health potions, and I happen to also do a discount for bundles of health potions, then I can give more value to players at the point where they care about it. So thinking about what, you know, as a retailer, what is going to be valuable to your customers, who are your players? Again, though, always think about what the value is to the player. This has got to be about a love affair between you and the player and giving them value so that they're supporting you and building your business as a game. So moving on from that, what's content? Well, content's a bit different. Content is not necessarily what you think it is. It can be the sort of outfits, the collections. It can be getting all the weapons and using all the weapons. It can also be progression. It could be, here's something which allows me to see that I've got a goal and I've gone and achieved it and I've had a satisfying journey through that piece. So creating events which are around progression, a sense of movement that maybe is separate from the general core loop or the core context of the game, again, can be super powerful. It can be about optimization. I love the hot dog principle in terms of creating texture to the economy of the game. For example, if you have a hot dog, they normally come in packs of 8, but the actual hot dog buns typically come in packs of 6. So you're always having to get the right balance to optimize things. I'm a big believer in scissor, paper, stone models, anything which means that it's not a linear thing. Don't have a +1 hat and a +10 hat. Have a hat of wonder and a hat of insight. Make them do different things so that when you buy things, you're making a strategic choice. You're not just upping linearly in a boring way. You're actually encouraging people to make the game more interesting. If I go up against somebody who's got the flame sword, my behavior in the game should be different. I want the water shield. Rain on his parade. I want that kind of decision-making process so that my purchases actually make everybody's game more interesting. It can also be narrative. It can be about the journey, the personal journey I go on. Even Tetris arguably had a kind of narrative, a literal one. If you remember, eventually opened up the Kremlin and fired lasers at aliens. Seriously, look it up. And then actually the biggest thing about what content is other players. One of the most important things is how do you encourage people to see other players as part of the experience? Features, I think, are massively important, but features do not have to be big. Features can be modes, they can be updates, they can be, you know, new things that you can offer, like mounts. We had pets in PlayStation Home a long time ago. They were massive, but actually they don't have to be big. One of the things I always advise people to do is think about your releases in a long-term basis. So let's say every 3 months you do a feature release. Within that, a third of that should be improvements to the user experience. A third of that should be bug fixes. And the rest of the last third should be 3 small feature updates. But they need to be things that people look forward to. And I won't release them on day 1. I will release 1 in the first month. I release the second in the second month, and I release the third at the end of that 3-month period after it's released. Because that means I have a pipeline. And what's more important is predictability. If I can show you regular, predictable updates, weekly, on the dot content releases, monthly, on the dot feature releases, that builds trust. And trust builds community. So thinking in pipelines matters. Thinking in the experience matters. And at the end of the day, to sum it up, it's about having a love for live. And that's what we try to do. If you're trying to work out what on earth we're about, we're basically a bit similar to the way people work as publishers. We sit in between the developer, focused on how we deliver revenue and retention. So we work as a LiveOps as a service. We let developers keep their content and keep their thing. We don't want to take it away. We're a partner. And essentially what we do is we provide community scheduling, and bums on seats to help you deliver your game. And then you're free to work with either self-publishing or working with external publishers to work on the user acquisition, the marketing, the things that those guys are excellent at. So that's basically us. In case you're interested, we're also currently doing a free review. So if you've got a game and a pitch deck and you want to share it with us, go to our website, fundamentally.games, sign up to the newsletter, and ping me an email with the pitch deck and a video of the gameplay, and I'll get our game design analyst to give you a review of your game and your pitch. You're completely free. And that's us. So that's me talking about me. Now I'm opening up to sort of whatever questions people have. So does anyone have any questions, or do I have to ask myself questions? So not really sure. So, oh, here you go. There seems to be a question in, it's a statement. Marcus, Chinese culture doesn't care about competition fairness. They just want to win competition by any means. I'm not sure that's quite fair. I think that there's just different cultural perspectives. So what is competition? The competition based on I have money isn't as socially awkward in Asian cultures, and not just in China, but in Asian countries in general. I think there is an aspect of just different values in terms of socialization as well. So what is kind of considered a positive social experience in an Asian game is not necessarily the depth that we would expect for a social experience in, say, a Western game. If you think about the kind of trash talk, QuakeNet culture we've built up in a lot of first-person shooters, that would be completely alien in an Asian game experience. And it can be toxic, absolutely, but it can also be quite valuable for certain segments of a Western audience. And the biggest challenge in running a live ops for a game like that is finding the balance where you can remove the toxicity and you can make sure you don't permit bullying and you don't permit other general abuse, but at the same time allow people to enjoy that kind of bantering process, and that's a really tricky balance. And I think that's really, really tricky to get. And as Marcus said, just for clarity for those who aren't seeing the chat, he didn't mean that in a negative light. His point, I think, is as mine is, it's really understanding the cultural differences. And that can also apply to the user acquisition and the marketing of the game, but I think it doubly affects the engagement with the game. One thing I noticed, I was doing a review for Pocket Gamer Jordan last year, where I looked at PUBG Mobile, and I discovered that Saudi Arabia is the second largest revenue source for PUBG Mobile in the world. The only larger one was the US. But what I also noticed when he did a bit of analysis is that the average player in Saudi Arabia was spending about 4 to 5 times per population than US users. So there is a culture where you may not have understood as being such a hardcore gaming environment that mobile play worked really well for, that a lot of game studios haven't been targeting. And yet you look at Tencent, and Tencent worked it out and have been really doubling down in that area. So really, I think understanding your audience, whatever they are, authenticity around the community you're building, and actually joining the dots. Something I didn't really go into in this talk is how important it is to join the dots between what you do as a living game and how you acquire users. So for us, it's really important that when we build a schedule, we're looking at what you're doing in a daily, your weekly, and monthly activity. We're creating assets to help foreshadow that. We're using social media. We're using all of the channels. We're using engagement with influencers or whatever as appropriate. So if you're working with a publisher, if you're working with an external party for your marketing, or even if you're doing that yourself, tying together the dots between what you know is coming and the way you promote your game can be hugely effective. You know, it's about creating a set of anticipation and a fear of missing out. If you can show people you've got a living, breathing, exciting, delighted community who themselves are reinforcing what you're saying because you're listening to them, you're using data, you're understanding their sentiment as well as what they actually do. And you're using that to inform your event scheduling, your promotion scheduling, your content scheduling, and your feature scheduling. That way, you're actually living up to the promise and trying to deliver an experience that players truly care about. And to my mind, that's what it's all about. So basically, that's me done. And like I say, if anyone is interested in a free report, then just feel free to go and sign up to our newsletter and ping us an email, and we'll be happy to help out. Also, we have a lot of free material for anyone. If you want to see the events calendar, we're now maintaining an events calendar for games. We also have a financer list. So if you're interested in finding out who is being invested, particularly in UK games, the financer list is maintained on a regular basis. Also, if you are an investor and you're not on that list, please let us know. Because again, we're trying to make sure we keep that up to date. And there's a whole bunch of articles and webinars and various other activities. We do regular series of events and articles and updates as well. So for our mind, being part of the game development community is critical. We make games. You know, we sit with teams making games and bringing games to life. So that's really what we're all about. Enough about me, though. I think, unless anyone's got any last questions for me, so hard asking yourself questions. I will, at that point, say thank you to me. Oh, there are questions here. I missed it. I can't. So at what stage of the product lifecycle should people start realistically enabling LiveOps? Hey, John, how you doing? Basically, as I was saying in the previous talk, start at your concept. Understand what it is you're going to do. You don't need a team. You need to think about how your back end, how your DevOps is going to work, and how you're going to enable your live team to run those activities. What data needs to be local so people can play offline, because I think offline play is important, but what tools do you need your LiveOps team to be able to have to hand so they can deal with problems, they can deal with creating events and activities, and they can actually delight players. And also how they roll back things. Make sure you can deal with it if something goes wrong. Problem management kills games if you don't have the resources, the ability to triage in place. And thinking about that is really important. It's very rare that the same people that you can make the game are good at delivering a game in live. Very rarely that they have that retail, that live community experience that is so essential to running a live game. Dan's got a question here. Very broad. How do you get into LiveOps as a career? Well, we're currently looking for a LiveOps producer, but you have to have a games production experience for that. I think essentially it's basically working with teams and thinking about the game and really just paying attention to what data and what sentiment you can get from how people run activities. Like any games developer, it's really difficult. There's the QA path, but I think increasingly working in community management can be a really powerful thing to do. And it's a little bit easier in some studios to get in as a community manager, but volunteer, engage, really try and embrace doing more than just, the social media messaging. Actually try and see how you can help them understand what value players have for their game on an ongoing basis. Dan, I hope that answered that. And are there games that don't suit LiveOps, Andy? Of course there are. You know this, and I've probably had this conversation with you before. There are lots of games which are a nugget of delight. However, even if your game doesn't require LiveOps, if you're not thinking about how you as a developer are retaining your players, how you sustain the audience for that game, that is essentially a problem. And I think bringing that together, bringing that whole experience together, whether it's you as a developer or the specific game, is the same fundamental skill set. It's understanding your audience, it's using data, it's communicating to people and delivering authenticity. At the end of the day, that phrase I used before, it's all about basically having a love for live. And on that note, I am going to say thank you very much to the guys who asked me the questions. That you guys know who you are.